Hello everyone, it is a great joy for me to be in the United States again, and it is an honor to be able to speak before all of you today. Thank you very much to those present, and especially thanks to CPAC, who has always had a special consideration for me. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mercy. Just a month ago, I said at the Davos Forum that I think we are going through a turning point in our history. The story takes place in phases or stages, moments in which the spirit of the idea materializes in a person, or in a group of people, sometimes close, sometimes with kilometers of distance between them, but with an invisible thread. That, if it could be observed, I presume would be very similar to the images that we observe the neural networks of the human brain. Today we are precisely in one of those moments in which history with a capital H is changing its course. We are seeing in real time the fate of the world bifurcating towards a new path, different from the place to which the elites and the political establishment of our countries were taking us. In the same way that in the 30s it could be glimpsed that the flame of freedom was being paid, and that a new change of servitude for humanity was beginning. Today we can finally say that the era of the omnipresent state is over. Today we are witnessing a moment when the long march of the state on the individual is coming to an end. I am referring, of course, to the collapse of the collectivist model and the dawn of a new era of freedom. We have prepared for this moment, and I genuinely believe that we are fighting a crucial battle for the future of humanity. But as I always say, you can only act effectively if the diagnosis is firm, which one starts is the correct one. We have to understand where we stand and what we are facing in order to know how to get to where we want. All over the world, Western societies are facing the same problem and the same enemy. A political class that brings more and more resources from citizens through taxes, in order to implement a model of unlimited state expansion. A political class with a God complex that seeks to regulate every aspect of people's lives by honoring one of the maxims of Benito Mussolini's fascism: inside the state everything, outside the state nothing, and nothing against the state. We have called this political class the State Party, an extended caste whose members, beyond superficial differences, share the fundamental idea of the advancement of the state over society. They are all those who, out of economic interest or ideological conviction, or even a certain naive idealism, work for the interests of the state. The traditional media or leagues and a half, the trade union oligarchy, the prebendary businessmen, the permanent, unelected, and consequently intrinsically irresponsible bureaucrats, the most so-called non-governmental organizations that do the dirty work of politicians, the academic institutions that provide the theoretical framework for state expansion, the supranational organizations, and all those that somehow belong to the great sect of world collectivism. And of course, this includes the traditional political parties that, regardless of their color, agree on the fundamental thesis that more state is always better. In Argentina, for example, we had a political system composed of about 50 shades of socialism. In the United States, there was the illusion of bipartisanship of a Democratic Party that set the agenda, and a Republican Party incapable of confronting it until the arrival of President Donald Trump. alive. Interestingly, mine will have to wait until the end. Interestingly, President Trump is an outsider, just like me, because the task ahead of us, the challenge ahead of us, is not for traditional politicians who have lived their whole life from the system. It is for people who owe nothing to anyone, who are not compromised by the system, and who know that change is more important than power for power's sake. There was a more or less explicit mentality in the political establishment of our two nations that the advancement of the state equated to the advancement of democracy, that every conquest of the state implied an act of social justice in the face of the supposed injustices of freedom, that the role of the state was to lead us to an egalitarian utopia through the systematic creation of supposed new rights, that obviously had to be financed by taxpayers. It is precisely in the center of this scheme that politicians are found. The main beneficiaries of this model of unlimited expansion of the state, those who make living from others by force a lifestyle, depositaries of powers and privileges that will be the envy of any monarch of history. No matter the TV fights or the supposed partisan differences, they all work for the same God, the sinister one, and his manifestation on earth, the Leviathan that Hobbes was talking about. That is why, apart from some peculiarities specific to each nation, all of us here have the same mission: to take power away from the state party and return it to society. That is to say, as Albert Knox said that he described in his book In Our Enemy the State, that social power was progressively taken away and transferred to the state by force. Our goal is to do the opposite way, increase the power of the citizen, and take the power away from the state. By his outside. Me too. Sorry? She's my girlfriend. Of course, it cannot be done by managing the state as it exists better or simply by correctly managing the resources available to it. But the only rational way is to reduce the state to its minimum possible expression. Reducing the size of the state is in itself an act of justice because every expenditure of the state is a subtraction from the taxpayer. From our point of view, the only acceptable state is the smallest possible state to return to the citizen what is his. Therefore, all the attributions that do not have to do directly with the protection of the three fundamental rights that are the right to life, liberty, and private property must return to their origin, the individuals associated voluntarily without state interference. This must be so because, unlike economics, power is a zero-sum game. Whatever power the state has, I cannot necessarily obtain at the same time in society. That is why we do not believe in partial solutions or compromises of the center. We know that doing things by halves is an invitation to the return of the state that, like a metastatic cancer, only knows how to expand and must be actively forced to retreat. It is useless to try to reach a fair mean. Everything that exceeds its essential function must be definitively removed from its orbit, or sooner or later it will return to usurp what does not belong to it. We know that it is not an easy task. The Moderna state has leftover tools that have grown in sophistication with the passage of time. We are not talking about an obvious state like the fascist or the communist one, but a subtle and insidious state that advances on the individual through art, propaganda, and cultural infiltration. Or at least that was the case until recently, as it is becoming increasingly difficult for him to disguise his totalitarian character. We have seen, to cite just one example, that in certain European countries, citizens are being arrested for expressing themselves on social networks. But in more general terms, I am talking about the financing of academia by encouraging the preparation of studies that justify the implementation of interventionist public policies and the covert purchase of media through public guidelines. I'm talking about the multiple engos that live off our taxes, cultural subsidies to produce propaganda, and here in the United States, of course, the USAID scandal that used millions of dollars from taxpayers to finance from magazines and television channels to electoral fraud as in Brazil, or governments with discriminatory aspirations, as in South Africa. And as I was saying, governments with discriminatory aspirations, like the South African one, among so many other aberrations including the climate paranoia agenda, the excesses of gender ideology, and the research that led to the creation of the COVID-19 virus. However, the only thing this globalist downline mechanism really accomplishes is to transfer wealth from the lower class of a rich country to the upper class of a poor country. In a nutshell, I am talking about a global network of influence and opinion formation paid for by citizens' taxes. A propaganda apparatus unprecedented in human history, perhaps the biggest political scandal we've ever seen. And then, those same hypocrites accuse Elon Musk of interfering in other countries' elections. Clearly, his chutzpah is as big as his totalitarian aspirations. And if that level of collectivism in blood had had solutions, its apologists would at least have something to cling to. But not even that. That was historically the excuse of the statists of the past. That prosperity would come through the rational management of resources by the state, resources that the private sector was unable to take advantage of. Question: and who manages the public sector? They are not human, however. We have witnessed that the greater the state expansion, the worse the people's quality of life. Not for nothing did Hayek devote his last book to explaining this phenomenon, which he called the fatal arrogance. But this is not accidental. Beyond their obvious incompetence, the political class is not dedicated to solving problems. After all, a solved problem is an area from which the state should withdraw. On the contrary, the political class is dedicated to perpetuating problems, and thus living off them forever. That's why they live by creating new problems, by installing them from their propaganda devices, and then offering themselves as a solution. And what does that solution consist of? In the implementation of regulations that cause even more problems to be solved by more regulations. In medicine, the term iatrogenesis is used to refer to the damage suffered by a patient as a result of medical care. It could be said then that the statist regime consists of hydrogenation as a state policy. That is, it is the doctor who enriches himself based on the progressive and intentional deterioration of his patients. With the model of the present state, the state breaks your legs to then sell you the crutches as a markup and force you to thank it, and persecutes you if you don't. As a counterpoint, some testimonies say that in traditional Chinese medicine, the family doctor constantly charged fees to keep the family healthy. That is, according to legend, when a member fell ill, the doctor stopped receiving the fees, seeing that he was incentivized to solve the illness in an efficient and fast way. Just imagine if the state could work that way. How much misery we would have saved. Today, those of us who want to dismantle this insane system are called undemocratic, but again, this is a misrepresentation of words, something very typical of the left, for a change. They do not call the government of the people democracy, but the paradigm of unlimited total state expansion that they themselves administer. For this, democracy exists, and only if those who want to win in order to be able to subject people to their whims. But when the electoral minority is them, the choice of the majority becomes authoritarianism. In fact, many of those who accuse us of being undemocratic were not even elected. They make decisions that affect billions of people around the world, and yet no one knows them. They are not responsible to anyone but themselves, and they cannot be thrown out by the popular vote, and yet, they come to talk to us about democracy. Anyway, they say that Trump and I are a danger to democracy, but they are actually saying that we are a danger to them. We are a danger for the party of the state, for those who live by its unlimited expansion, for those who want a dependent individual and subjected to its regulatory whims, and you know what? They have privileges having been elected by the majority of each of our peoples with the clear mandate to take away a power that does not belong to them. Today, our countries Argentina and the United States need to go through a second independence. The first one freed us from the power of the European monarchies. The second will free us from the tyranny of the state party. That's why we've put so much effort into identifying it, because you can't fight against what you don't know, and having a well-defined enemy is a fundamental aspect of our cultural battle. Now we know him, we have beaten him in the elections, and we are in the process of disarming his Leviathan, which is a tool of perpetual oppression. We don't have any secret formula, just to know human history, and to know what has worked and what hasn't. That is why, with humility, I want to reflect a little on how we have been carrying out this battle. We work firmly and head-on, without giving rise to compromises. We defend a set of values that we are not willing to negotiate, just as they have not been willing to negotiate when it comes to taking away our freedom. What they imposed if our consent is being removed without their consent. That is why we have passed the chainsaw through the sectors and attributions of the state that we consider superfluous, redundant, unnecessary, or directly harmful to society. And even more, this year we will embark on phase 2 of this process that we have baptized as the deep chainsaw. To continue shrinking the state by returning to people the wealth that should never have been taken away from them. The interesting thing is that this justice process has a political correlate, because by its nature, the state party was historically financed by misallocated public spending and shady business dealings with the state. Therefore, to shrink the state is to cut the hose to the clients of the state insisted in it, who exercised a fierce resistance to change, using the money of the payers and taxes to keep us subjugated. Our method is similar to that of our dear friend Elon Musk, to review office by office, keep what works, and discard the rest. That's why he got her a chainsaw with us. No one who can't justify the cost of his salary in taxes is safe. Many of them will have to return to the private sector and earn a living by offering their goods and services in the market, just like the taxpayers they have lived on for so many years. My deepest condolences to the politicians who believed that this moment would never come and are not prepared, because they are going to get a splash of cold water. Fortunately for them, in every misfortune, there is an opportunity, and due to our progress as a regulator, private sector salaries will continue to rise, so if they do things right, they will be able to be part of progress, but far from the state caste. As I have already said, this is not an easy task here in the United States. Rebel bureaucrats have tried to sabotage the work of the Government Efficiency Department, and are resorting to illegal bureaucratic mechanisms to try to block any reform, which also happens in our country, and is something we must fight every day. But none of those have not taken by surprise. We are aware that they will do everything possible to stop this change, regardless of the resulting damage. If they have to destroy the world to keep their privileges, they are going to do it, and we are going to keep fighting. But today, the problem extends beyond the hardships to which the model of the present state has subjected each of our nations individually. Because the decline of our governments during recent history throughout the West not only impoverished materially, spiritually our own citizens. It also weakened us politically, economically, culturally, and socially in the face of the external enemy. It made us morally weak and made us vulnerable to the worst expressions of barbarism, the worst enemies of freedom. And they cannot be given an inch because when they smell blood, they advance emboldened and without mercy. This was demonstrated during the cowardly attacks perpetrated on October 7, 223 in Israel. That cost more than 1,000 innocent people and the capture of 251 people. This week, Israel received the lifeless bodies of the living family that remained kidnapped by the terrorist and murderous regime of Hamas. Among them is a mother and her 2 children, a 4-year-old boy and a baby as young as 9 months. This regime is so unscrupulous and bloodthirsty that in the last dirty gesture, they had no better idea than to crudely display their coffins to the cheering of a crowd without the slightest respect. This is what is at stake, and we cannot afford to fail. That is why it is essential that the nations that we have embraced in the ideas of freedom remain united and collaborate with each other. We must form an alliance of free nations because, as I have said on another occasion, organized evil can only be defeated by the well-organized. Only through this right-wing international will we be able to put an end to the political caste we are facing, which is sinking the West to the darkest depths, and regain the impetus to protect the despotic forces that want us subjugated. That's why I also want to take the opportunity to announce that Argentina wants to be the first country in the world to join this reciprocity agreement that the Trump administration is asking for in trade matters. In fact, if we were not restricted by Mercosur, Argentina is already working on a mutually beneficial free trade agreement with the United States that does not unfairly burden Argentine producers, but also those of the Americans. This is because only by working together, those of us who want to build a free world will be able to get ahead. Only then will we be able to get out of the nightmare to the omnipresent state, and thus be able to continue doing what we know how to do as the West, to test the limits of the possible, relying on the creativity of society and not on the sterile discretion of bureaucrats. Only in this way can we return to our path of greatness as a civilization, honoring our ancestors who gave their lives to see a free world and a prosperous humanity. Only in this way will we finally be able to reconnect with ourselves and recreate in what made us great as a civilization. May God bless the Argentine Republic, may God bless the United States, and may the forces of heaven be with us. Long live the fucking freedom!